this masterclass, and I'll do a very brief intro. I know you guys are excited to get into ESG and HR, but just allow me a minute or two just to speak a little bit about Regenesys. And a long-held passion at Regenesys has been learning and development throughout one's career. At Regenesys, the heart of what we propose is continuous development. And if you look at the diagram in front of you, it's a very fancy way of giving product offerings. We've got an undergrad and postgrad offering, which also caters for the bursaries element of your BE scorecard. We've got an online offering where we have a bunch of short courses, often customized for our corporate customers, and we're able to deliver it online. We have a range of customized solutions that we've done and implemented over many years and for many corporates. We've got learnerships and QCT online qualifications. And lastly, we've got short courses and masterclass, which is what we do today. So, it's been an absolute pleasure working with the team on developing this course. And I know there are a lot of work into it. We can go to the next slide. Our mission of awakening potential really talks to developing the human being. And in doing that, we use this approach, a very unique learning approach, because we believe at Regenesys, we're not in the space of developing the best leaders or the best employees or the best employers. We believe in developing the best human being, because the best human being takes different roles. A manager or a leader, right? And we believe by equipping human beings through our innovative teaching and learning methods, they become better versions of themselves. And we do it through a range of classrooms, learning projects, various interactive methodologies, transformative learning, and ultimately we try and get a behavioral shift, which is the aim of education. And in our teaching and learning, we intertwine multiple intelligences, if you want to call it that. And you can see in front of you, it's the cognitive intelligence, emotional, spiritual, physical, financial, and network, because these are all essential elements to developing a successful human being. And I think without further ado, let me start off by introducing our ESG class and our facilitator. I've written a small piece on him, so if you'll allow me, I'm going to read and I'm going to cheat. I just want to read a little bit about Ron Waters, who is our facilitator in the ESG class. So give me a second while I pull that out. So Mr. Ronald Waters, who you can see in front of you, he's got an MBL from UNISA, BCom accountancy from the University of Johannesburg. He's also done Christian Studies diploma through Auckland Park. Ron Waters is the head of the School of Finance at Regenesys. Before joining Regenesys, Mr. Waters lectured in accounting sciences at UNISA, at Harvard Technology in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi, as well as on various MBA programs of business schools across Netherlands and the University of Wales and in other areas as well. His commercial background includes stints at an audit firm, KPMG, and Brain Chartered Accountants. He has held various executive positions at SA Housing Trust, CELC, and heading business assurance services for the MTN Group. He's also a certified ethics officer through the Ethics Institute of SA, a certified financial officer through the Chartered Institute of Business Accountants, a forensic practitioner, an Institute of Commercial Forensic Practitioners, and a certified business resilience manager, which he obtained through Centrix in Canada. And I think there's a lot more that I could talk about, Ron. But Ron, I think without any further delays, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Kapil, for that introduction. Folks, it's a great honor to join you this afternoon and to
Oh, he muted himself.
Areas that we can improve on. ESG very close to my heart, especially the environmental stuff, and in particular today, looking at specifically at climate change. I think we've been aware of, and on the agenda, especially in South Africa, when we look at things like integrated reporting, something that I've been involved in quite extensively, we focused a lot on, the social part of it, and maybe in terms of environment, a little bit on biodiversity, but not much have gone thinking and action has gone into climate change. And I think even before I start, we need to understand that we need a certain mindset. So from a mindset perspective, most of us, and I was definitely in that category, of people that was thinking that, we as humans are there and we are there to use whatever resources, natural resources we have, to our benefit. And I think we're now at a point in the history of humans, of humankind, where we should realize that, we are part of nature, and that we do not stand outside of nature. And we are part and parcel of this whole ecosystem that we call the planet Earth. So with that in mind, let's look at climate change and what we are going to cover this afternoon. So our first area that we're going to cover is why climate change. And the reason for that is to understand the context and the seriousness of doing something about climate change. Then why our organization? Why your organization? Why should your organization get involved? And to what extent should you be getting involved in climate actions? And then, most importantly, why the HR function? Why should it be your baby? And and we'll cover that area in a little bit more detail. So the rationale behind what we are looking at, of course, is to understand, if we understand climate change, the seriousness thereof, in terms of, we know what is happening, and we know that climate change has a huge impact on the planet, and that we need to start changing our worldview. So we need to start thinking differently about life, and especially about caring for our planet. So we'll start by looking at, a little bit of content on climate change. So please, I'm no physics professor, and I'm also not here to bore you to death with what climate change is all about. But we need a basic understanding so that we can be ambassadors for climate change in our organizations and wherever we go as well. So firstly, what is climate change? So when we talk about climate change, the first thing that's important is the greenhouse effect. That's all about the Earth warming up. So you've heard people talk about global warming. So climate change is not only global warming, it includes other aspects such as loss of biodiversity and so on. So climate change is a little bit bigger than just global warming, but the greenhouse effect is really about this planet warming up. Then we're going to look a bit at deforestation. Is another big issue, challenge that we have worldwide, and there are many reasons for that. That we will go into a little bit, and then the atmosphere. So talking about air pollution and how air pollution also contributes to the huge carbon emissions that's been amount of carbon emissions that's been released into our atmosphere. Then in terms of ocean currents, we have also polluted our oceans. It's under challenge. Fossil fuels is and we will go into that a little bit. Was probably the biggest cause for climate change and the biggest cause in terms of carbon emissions that's released. And then what is important from an HR perspective would be to look at human costs. How does this climate change affect human beings? And how are we going to treat this going forward? So there's a thing called the 2-degree limit. Now, we are in a situation, and this has been discussed at climate change meetings internationally and determined by scientists that if the Earth warms up another 2 degrees, we are in serious problems worldwide. We will lose some of our major cities that will be underwater, and the chance of reversing this global warming effect may become irreversible. So the big aim and purpose would be for organizations and individuals, since we as humans are the major contributing factor to climate change, should actually pursue a net zero target. So net zero meaning that we aim to reduce our carbon emissions to as close as zero as we possibly can. So let's just look at one or two of these items that's listed on here, and just get a little bit of a better understanding of what it's about. So firstly, we look at our greenhouse effect and gases. Now remember, it's all about, if you look at that CO2 there, it's the biggest contributor to climate change, that meaning being our carbon emissions. So what happens? So we can see that this is how this illustration shows us how heat is trapped close to the Earth's surface by these greenhouse gases or carbon emissions. And we can see these emissions do not escape. So it takes over 100 years for carbon emissions to actually penetrate through the outer atmosphere. So it stays on the Earth for at least on the Earth's atmosphere for over 100 years, which means what happened is that we have a blanket that's wrapped around the Earth, and that causing this immense heat, so the heat cannot be released into the outer atmosphere. So our greenhouse gases then include carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxides. Now, the one item here that is the most damaging is the carbon dioxide, and as I indicated, it stays in our atmosphere for quite a while. So if we remove the carbon dioxide or carbon emissions, the terrestrial greenhouse effect would collapse. So that would mean that we can stop the warming of the Earth, and we can stop the temperatures from rising. So it does not mean that we can reverse it, but at least we can stop this increase in temperatures. So our next item to look at is deforestation. So why deforestation? Why does it happen? So if we look at deforestation, we actually lose another 4.7 million hectares of forest on an annual basis. So that is an immense number, and it's on an annual basis. So we can see how we are losing our forests, and the key reason for this, obviously, is agricultural expansion. This deforestation threatens our biodiversity. It means that we are losing animal life. So the species that was available on the Earth 100 years ago or 50 years ago, we are seeing decreasing numbers in terms of our animals and other forms of life due to the fact that we are losing our forest space. And also the forest is a typical mechanism that's been used as a carbon sink. So it would actually help to absorb the carbon emissions. So by reducing our forests, we are increasing the amount of carbon emissions out there. So in terms of the atmosphere, if we look at the atmosphere, we can see that the greenhouse gases increases temperatures. So you only have to look at the daily weather reports to see how temperatures have increased over the last couple of years. Warnings of heat waves, droughts. We had terrible heat waves in Europe. Even during this winter, Portugal, for example, had a heat wave. We have in our atmosphere, we have intensity levels that increase due to extreme rainfall and tropical cyclones, and it's not that it didn't happen before, but it just seems to increase in intensity and also in the number of times that it happens are also on the increase. And the same for tropical cyclones. It has become something that is happening on a more frequent basis. Also, the burning of fossil fuels results with other chemical pollution that's being released, mixed with our water in our atmosphere, which creates acid rain. It is countries like China and India are typical examples of environments where incidents of acid rain has taken place. It's the problem with acid rain is that it moves across borders, so your contaminated rain affect other areas as well. It also affects the quality of your food, because it's the very water that that's being used for agriculture purposes. So it has that knock-on effect as well. If we look at the sea, I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to visit a new part of a city in the Middle East, and it had a new, very new mall that was built on the seafront, most beautiful building. And when I walked on the beach a couple of kilometers away from the mall, I was shocked seeing the number of plastic bags that was sort of lying on the beach coming out of the sea. And it was so sad, because it's such a most beautiful coastline and the most beautiful sea, and yet it was plastic bags everywhere. And it just sort of again showed that, you know, how we as humans, you know, we pollute our water and our seas. So what is the sea is actually, if we look at it, the sea is to a large extent the lungs of the planet. So the sea is supposed to absorb the heat coming from carbon emissions and other natural causes of increased temperatures. So by polluting the sea, we lose that benefit. So the greenhouse gases that heats up our oceans result in rising sea levels. So we have that happening, and also our fish are moving to the poles for the very reason that the water is becoming too hot elsewhere. And then we have the acidification of oceans as well as a result of the carbon emissions, which means that our coral reefs are disappearing, and it really interferes or has a major impact on our oceans ecosystem. So it's really you know, going through these specific areas is, like I said, it's really giving us some form of understanding that the seriousness of what we are dealing with. So the plastic soup talking about the plastic bags. If we look at this, there's over 40 million tons of plastic a year that enters the oceans. Just think about that. That's an enormous amount. And plastic stays in the ocean. So there are many examples and research that was done that actually showed how much of plastic lies at the bottom of the sea, and also how much of this disintegrated plastic is in the water and in the fish that is eaten. So it gives a bit of a bleak scenario, but it is something that we need to understand so that we can take action against this. So firstly, looking at fossil fuels. Now, fossil fuels is the main cause for carbon emissions. So fossil fuels causes greenhouse gases, carbon emissions in two ways. Firstly, it's about the extraction of the fossil fuel. And then secondly, it is about burning the fossil fuel. So fossil fuel is being used for heating and cooking, driving road vehicles, making plastics, fuel for airplanes. So we can see that fossil fuel is used for many reasons. And as we saw earlier, that if we can reduce fossil fuel, the use of fossil fuels, it's going to have a major impact on the level of carbon emissions. So from a personal and a corporate perspective, it is obviously something that needs a lot of attention. So, for example, if you've watched the news lately, you'll see that the aircraft companies in the US are specifically have designed or in the process of introducing aircraft that uses or that releases at least 60% less carbon emissions than the airplanes that's currently in operation. So even from the aircraft sort of industry, there's also been action taken to reduce the carbon emissions, albeit maybe not enough. So if we look at the human costs of climate change, it brings us it a little bit closer to us as human beings, and in particular the following items. So firstly, we have climate inequalities. So what does that mean? It means that we have countries like in South Asia and in North Africa, where we have poorer communities than in, let's say, Central Europe. That is earmarked for the effects of climate change, in the sense that they are the worst affected by climate change, more so than actually the countries where the carbon emissions are happening. So, and also, if you look at the poorer countries, they do not have the funding to counter or to put things in place to sort out the carbon emission problem. So this being a worldwide problem means that richer countries need to to contribute and assist the poorer countries in solving the carbon emissions problem. The next item is climate migrants. So what does that mean? It means that if you're in let's take South Africa, and you may be in the Northern Cape, where it is extremely hot, people will start moving to the colder areas. So maybe you would want to move to the Eastern Cape. And you would find people start moving away from these specific areas. So that also has an impact on organizations. As people migrate in the same country, and this is happening all over the world, and organizations need to take note of that. Then infectious diseases like COVID-19, it is being predicted that we will have more of these diseases caused by carbon emissions, caused by climate change. That will happen on a more frequent basis, and organizations need to take note of that. And the next item is, again, increased blood pressures, hypertension, all illnesses related to increased temperatures. So whereas in an organization, you would find a couple of people may have hypertension or even a respiratory type problem, this will increase due to the increasing temperatures and other severe weather patterns that's happening. Malnutrition is another area of concern. Again, because of in terms of food security, certain areas are going through tremendous droughts or extreme floods, both not being good for food security. We've seen many of these events in the South African environment, and this is happening worldwide, and it especially has a huge effect on poorer countries as well. So again, something that affects our society on a large scale. Then the fresh water availability. Again, we have not only more people on this planet, on an annual basis, our population worldwide increase. We also have agriculture that competes for the same fresh water in terms of their produce. So fresh water, as has been predicted 50 years ago, has really become a major problem. So looking at all of this, it is then a no-brainer that we should actually pursue net zero. And that means that we as humans, we have caused climate change. We are the major contributors to that in terms of our carbon emissions. And therefore, we need to pursue net zero carbon emissions. So we have to look at our carbon footprint. As from an organization perspective, we have to look at our carbon footprint to say to what extent are we responsible for carbon emissions. How many tons of carbon emissions do we as an organization release into our atmosphere on an annual basis? And so first of all, to define that, and then secondly, to have a carbon budget to say we need to move to a certain point. We may not become have a total zero or achieve a total zero in terms of carbon emissions, but we can get very close to that. And other than that, obviously, then to pursue net zero. So it's again, it should be the responsibility of organizations to assist in this endeavor that has been undertaken by most governments and society at large to reduce carbon emissions and be seen as part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. So our next area to go into is like seeking solutions. So before I do that, is there anybody that would like to contribute to a discussion around do you really think that climate change is a reality, or is it just somebody's imagination? How do you see climate change? Is it just a hype? Let me hear from our participants. Do you think it's a serious problem or not? And is it our problem or not our problem? Can I just hear from the participants? Yep. All right. Okay. So, thank you. So, I think that it's. I get some response really confirming that it is a real problem. And then also, thank you for this comment. The issue has been that corporate philosophy still is maximum value creation for shareholders. Thank you for that. Sean says, I think we are in an agreement that this is a current and a long-term issue. Absolutely. This is exactly what we are in for. We are in for a journey, and this is not a quick fix type environment. So moving on from there, let's look at the type of solutions that is suggested out there to deal with this climate change problem. So first of all, we have these climate accords. So we just had the African COP, which happened in November last year. A bit of a disappointment in terms that it was overshadowed by the conflict in Europe. So that took a little some of the focus away from this problem that we have, and that's sad. The second item is climate justice. So climate justice is very tricky, and the point here really is that countries that can ill afford to suffer the consequences of carbon emissions are being impacted on by countries where greenhouse gases are being released or have been released over the last couple of years. And so basically, as far as the carbon emissions is concerned, it doesn't stay within the boundaries of the country. So it moves into other areas. And those that may not even have contributed to the creation of the problem, these countries are suffering. And it has become the responsibilities of those who are mostly responsible for these carbon emissions to assist those countries to resolve the problem. So that's in essence the issue around climate justice. Then I read this book called Doughnut Economics by Kate Raworth some time ago, and I'll never forget the introduction to this book. She's a professor in economics, and she said she had a very bright student, a doctoral student that came to her from an Asian student, and the student said to her, "You know what? It has been my life's my life aspiration to really to become an economist, and yet today I'm so disappointed because from an economic perspective, we are in this world looking at everything except what really matters." So that really it is really bringing out that need for looking at economics and economic development a little bit differently. So what Kate Raworth did is that she developed this donut. It's a model, looks like a donut, and at the top end of the model, there's what she called the ecological ceiling. And on the other side of the ecological ceiling, one of the items that's in there, amongst others like pollution and water, is climate change. So what this model really tells us is that it is time that we stop just looking at the indicators, economic indicators we see in business reports on a daily basis around exchange rates and commodities and so on. But we should also add to this list our fresh water levels, our carbon emissions, and those things that really matters, that's got a long-term effect on this planet. Another area that's being looked at is climate engineering. So through technology and other engineering innovations, there are many organizations and societies attempting to create some intervention to reduce the effects of carbon emissions. Now again, it's the endeavor. The idea is good, but it also creates some discussion, and even in some cases, there's good grounds for ethical issues. So some of the climate engineering activities may actually contribute to carbon emissions rather than helping to solve the problem. So it is a very contentious area as such. Then looking at alternative energy, so especially around electricity, the use of fossil fuel to try and replace this with something different. Renewable energies, and we know, especially in South African context as well, with our Eskom problem, maybe this is the one area that is actually positive, is that we may end up by giving the world a very good case study for moving to renewables, albeit out of need. A very important measure that needs to be put in place. Then reforestation. We need to plant trees. We need to re-establish forests. So this is extremely important. Then to adapt to a changing environment. So it means that we will have to change certain habits. Maybe if it's possible to, I spoke to CEO of a company the other day, and he said to me he's part of an international company, and they've asked him to send him a report of how many people have stopped driving their vehicles to work or using buses by cycling. So I don't know how practical it is, but it is definitely the type of measures that's being implemented worldwide. So from a corporate focus perspective, so we are now moving away from actual climate change in terms of what it is to how does it affect the corporate world. So having been part of the corporate world for many, many years in organizations like MTN and in the banking environment, it is important that corporates understand and focus on specifically on these areas. First of all, competitive pressures. So some of your competitors, our competitors, are aggressively pursuing net zero. They've got huge marketing stunts out there, telling the world about what they are doing in terms of green initiatives, about reducing their carbon emissions. I can just think about maybe organizations like Nedbank as being seen as a green organization, that sort of brand. Then we would have organizations like PepsiCo, for example, who uses only solar in their warehouses, no electricity, and so on. So there are many examples. So if you are in a business environment where there's competitors, you will have to also make sure that you be seen and perceived by your customers as an organization that is serious about reducing carbon emissions. The one problem that can happen here is that by being overzealous when it comes to carbon emissions or claiming reduction in carbon emissions, you may become guilty of something called greenwashing, which means that an organization makes a statement about reducing its levels of carbon emissions, yet it is not really happening. All right. So at this point, are there any questions? So let's look at the chat box. Yeah, it says that this masterclass on ESG is just one small segment of the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. A relatively new accounting framework. Absolutely. Programs like this ESG masterclass only serve to advocate for economic systems change and new corporate norms to protect our natural environment and secure a safe, sustainability, and equitable future for all. Yes, absolutely. So I think that looking at our next point really emphasizes this. So there's a lot of regulatory pressures that is that's out there, that in terms of reducing carbon emissions. So we are in the process of this carbon emissions of a climate change bill that's out there that will be introduced as an act, which will give certain powers to the to local government and provincial government, ensuring that organizations contribute to combating carbon emissions. So if your organization is not ready for that, this is going to be an issue. Carbon tax. So the Carbon Tax Act is already out there, and organizations are paying carbon tax. The big problem with the carbon tax is that the Carbon Tax Act has made a provision for escalating tax structure going forward from 2021. So you will find that the tax rate will increase substantially as far as that's concerned. So you may find yourself with the organization might find itself with a much larger carbon tax bill going forward. Yes, so we've got here a comment from our in our chat box. Yes, Europe will require a business with more than 500 employees to report on ESG by 2024 and by 2025, all companies. From an accounting perspective, the International Federation of or the International Accounting Body, IFRS, has released two draft statements on reporting. The one on sustainability with a focus on environment, and then also the sustainability draft statement is two that specifically deals with climate change. So if in the past, and I've seen this looking at the South African organizations, is that there are a lot of bold statements made in integrated reports around climate change endeavors and climate change actions, this now is more than just a lip service or a marketing ploy. Now you have to report in terms of your measured carbon emissions. So there will be, there is in the climate change draft standard, there are guidelines in terms of what should be reported, what metrics should be used by different industries. So whatever is claimed in an integrated report now has to be backed up by specific specific metrics. So that is also going, and these statements, I would gather the statement will be released this year, 2023. So it should become compulsory by 2024. And as you said, they rightly Europe, but I would think that it's going to be international requirement by 2024. Risks and reputational damage. So there are two types of risks that you need to keep in mind as an organization. So first is the physical risks. So if we take the KZN situation, for example, the Toyota factory that was underwater. So the physical risk means that these sudden floods or sudden droughts, like in the Eastern Cape, Kubergel, there's a big water problem. Now, if you're in an industry that is water intensive, you have a big problem. So organizations now need to take into consideration the possibility of extreme floods or extreme droughts and the effect that it will have on the organization. And also make sure that they do take or they are insured in terms of that. And also what we call transition risks. Those are the things that you need to, those are the costly things. So in other words, you need to, let's say, turn your office building into a green building. So it's going to cost money to do that. And where will you find the finances for that? So transition risk and physical risks regarding this is important. And of course, reputational damage that can happen if you are ignorant about climate change. So there's opportunities as well. So different forms of green innovation, certain things that can be put in place. So we just think about solar, for example. So as an organization, you should not only think doom and gloom, but also think about opportunities. Insurance, because of the events that's happening, the cost of insurance and the level of cover that may be available going forward may not be as good as it currently is. And also the insurance industry could be under threat in terms of what they can offer and in terms of the claims they need to pay. And then, of course, management commitment is extremely important. Without management commitment, there can be no initiative on climate change in an organization. And then the organizational culture, and this is where the HR comes in, the last two points very strongly. This is where HR comes in as a major role player in transforming the company. So let's move on to, where does HR fit into this? Why is it your problem? Remember, we asked that question up front. So integrated governance places significant emphasis on an organization's relationship with the environment, society. So the new ISO 37000 brings another dimension to corporate governance. So it says, when we talk corporate governance, we need to include also green governance. We need to include sustainability. So if we look at green governance, we can see that the areas where we need to act also then includes green HR management, green marketing management, and green financial management. So for our purposes, we are focusing then on the green HR management with a particular or specific focus on climate change. So for green governance, we need stakeholder involvement, and that means not only the shareholders operating within environmental laws and best practice, transparency regarding the good and the bad environmental outcomes. So when we do reporting, we must make sure that we report both the good and bad, meeting the needs of society regarding climate change and other environmental issues, using resources effectively and efficiently, in terms of pollution, quality of water, making decisions for a sustainable future. So even in the King 4 report, we can see that sustainability is not just about looking after what we have today, but also looking after about that which will be dear to future generations. So that's very important. So why the HR function? So firstly, HR possesses the expertise in implementing strategies. HR possesses social management tools that's effective for mobilizing employee energy and coordinated action. That's one of their main functions. And HR is the one function that impacts employees in all other organizational functions. So it is the one function, even if you look at the porter's value chain, it's the one function that runs across the whole organization. Organization is all about people. So at this point, just a question. Are there any reasons why that you want to add to this list? Why HR? Or even why not HR? So just give us an indication in the chat box. What do you think? Should the HR play a major role in an organization's climate change efforts, yes or no? So from the Kapil's side, as an educational institution, Regenesys has a responsibility and an obligation to our environment and people to educate the world on such matters. So of triple bottom line and ESG. So Regenesys have been, for the as long as I've been involved with Regenesys for a couple of years, really been on the forefront, being ambassadors for sustainability development, and being entrenched in all the courses of Regenesys. So yes, that's from a typical educational institution. I think from that perspective, Regenesys is ahead of most academic institutions, and in terms of, and that sort of adds to our whole philosophy around spiritual intelligence, meaning that we are part of something bigger, that, you know, we're not just focused on academic excellence as subject matter. Yes, Ulrika, we got this. Most HR leaders are focused on operational matters rather than strategic. And Marlene Riss says yes. Just in terms of research that was done, about 2 years ago. First of all, the research had two aims. The one was to determine whether HR is important for the HR function is important in terms of embedding climate change in organizations. And secondly, how many organizations actually do use the HR function effectively. And sadly enough, not many organizations did use the HR function, but the conclusion was that more and more organizations are using their HR function to drive their climate change efforts. I guess because they are being forced now to do something about it. Yep. Another one, yes. Departments within business and organizations like should work towards redefining the culture of accountability in business for our companies, communities, and future generations by creating and cascading new norms of corporate leadership that can build a better future. This emphasis on corporate leadership is absolutely critical to the process. Yes, because HR plays a critical role in culture transformation to promote a culture of sustainability through creating awareness and education about climate change. If HR can't assist you, nobody can assist you to do this. And it's only it takes an effective HR function to really make an impact in terms of a culture transformation. Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to what is green HR management really about? So it's a set of policies, practices, and systems, and you can read this yourself. So it's a structure that you put in place over and above the fact that you need to have an ethical dimension. You have to add this ethical dimension as sort of almost a transparent cover on top of what you are doing. It is very important that a business ethical perspective is the foundation on which you build green HR management. In our chat again, HR can be a catalyst for redefining the culture of sustainability accounting. That's absolutely true. So what we have done, we've developed a model in terms of explaining how the whole HR management can be implemented within an organization. What from an HR function perspective you need to take into account. This is a model. There are many models that you can use, but in particularly I like this model, everything in the right context. So let's look at this model quickly, and I'm not going to go into much detail on the different components of it, and basically just introduce you for the sake of the masterclass to the different dimensions. So it's basically a three-dimensional model that says, firstly, we look at the climate change context. Now we've had now this elaborate discussion on global warming and pollution of the oceans and deforestations and so on. So we understand the problem area that we have to deal with. Then on the other hand, in this climate change context, we look at the stakeholders and those, very importantly, including governments, regulators, potential investors and potential investors, employees. And at this point in time in the US, it's also been researched that companies that got a very active climate change policy in place, that their share price is better than that of their competitors. So something to think about when you approach your company about this. Then, of course, the climate change risks and opportunities and pursuing net zero. That is basically looking at the external environment. Then within the organizations, green leadership management. So there must be a green vision that's part of the bigger vision, same with green values, looking after the planet, saving energy, and so on. And then a competitive green strategy. This is an opportunity to really market your company out there. So in terms of what is the value that you can create, what is the sustainability, your sustainability efforts, really showing your care and caring about customers, which is very important. And then a green organizational culture, which is a major issue, and you've also mentioned that in the chat box. Then obviously green operations. So getting people to think and do green. So before I decide to get to send, let's say I've got 2 packages that needs to go to from Johannesburg to Pretoria. Instead of sending it off, the one in the morning and the other one in the afternoon, I can send it off with the same courier and just doing one trip. In other words, the release of carbon emissions is less. So that's the typical things that we need to do. We don't need to develop rocket science. Yeah, we just need to be practical and be thinking a little bit more green. On the reporting side, integrated reporting, ask for a sustainability report. In that sustainability report, I can assure you, looking at that draft standard, it really focuses on the environment, and it focuses on climate change, and then obviously the standard on climate change. Now, from an HR perspective, this is the third dimension. There's and that's in terms of this model. There's many other models, as I said. I don't say use one model, but I think this is a neat model. So firstly, if we look at this model, it talks about leadership, green leadership development, management alignment, and commitment. So that's very important. If we don't have management commitment, you know how difficult it is to implement something. Then in terms of the HR strategy, we need to translate that into policies as to make sure that the company act on that. And then in terms of the culture, green organizational development, green communications. So especially on the intranet and maybe even on the internet, show that we are we brand ourselves as a green company. So that part's also important. Green innovation. Get people to show us how to reduce carbon emissions or the use of energy in an organization, and green knowledge management, building green practices, let's say using less water into our processes, our documented processes, and so on. Green HR planning. So that's really from the transformational side, things that we can look at, and then from our traditional HR perspective, we can look at we need to look at green work and job design. So what does this mean? This means that if we look at the job currently done by somebody, then we say if we go green, let's say we've got these climate change initiatives. Somebody needs to actually do the activities. So we need to train. We need to get somebody that is skilled in doing that. And in our job designs, we need to include those activities that relate to certain jobs in that job design, so that we know that our climate change initiatives are being actioned. And then obviously going into green recruiting and staffing. So what does that mean? So if we recruit somebody, we want them to know that we have values in terms of climate change, in terms of energy saving, and that we are an organization that's concerned about things like this. I can assure you an organization like Regenesys is really serious about it, and you do find this typical line of discussion when we recruit people, and also in terms of our staffing, make sure that the people that's part of your organizational team, that they actually are serious about the environment. Green training and development is something that needs to happen. A lot of people have different perspectives and understandings and misconceptions about climate change. That needs to change, and therefore people need to be trained and developed. It needs to happen on a regular basis. So at least once a year, all employees, including management, should be exposed to some form of training. Then from a green performance management perspective, it needs to be built into the performance management system, so that, let's say, for example, you get 5 credits in terms of on your performance assessment for reducing carbon emissions, or suggesting some or other energy saving type activity that could all relate to you as specifically to your organization. It would be different for all organization. And then green rewards, recognition, giving people recognition for how they've contributed to the organization, decreasing its carbon emissions. And then lastly on the list, obviously show that or take into consideration the well-being of employees, because what you will find is going to happen going forward is a higher level of absenteeism in your organizations, a lot more people with respiratory type of problems, people working slower, as we see now in the Northern Cape. Those workers that some people actually died of heat exposure. So it means that we will have to look at the well-being of our employees and also change the way that we work with them going forward. So comments on the framework. What do you think about the framework? Is it usable? Is it what do you think about it? This framework, as I said, it's one of. Does the framework talk to you? Is it something you can use in your organization? Give us your comments in the chat box. Okay, from Sean here, when will we start to see legislation that drives this type of behavior? So, Sean, we currently have the climate change bill that's out there. It will soon, it had its major comments was due in mid last year. So I would imagine it will become an act during the course of this year. And so this legislation is becoming a reality. All right. So moving on to our so what I'm going to do in terms of the time that we've got left, I think I've discussed a lot of these items already. So in terms of the model, just the three contexts, we've spoken about that, and also the climate context, and then about the company context, we spoke about that. So I'm just running through it quite quickly. So those are the, here we have our transformational HRM, those three areas of leadership, strategy, and culture. So, yeah, so yes, there will be, we've got comments from Refuelware here. Yes, there are practical initiatives that can be implemented and practiced. Majority are already in place as required by ISO 14001, 2015, absolutely so. And if you want to be ISO compliant, you have to make sure that you do comply. And you may find that organizations that you actually do business with insist on that certification. Will there be any training available on this new legislation? Absolutely. In conjunction with our School of Law, we will also run a training program on the new legislation from Regenesys perspective. Yep. So transformational, we talk about that. Green leadership development. I think that what is very important again, guys, is down at the top. They should lead the implementation. There should be green and climate change and environmental issues needs to be discussed on board agendas on a regular basis. You should enforce practices and policies. In terms of your strategy, again, those initiatives should be put in place to drive the implementation of the climate change initiatives. And in terms of our organizational culture and work systems, we should make sure that we have that green organizational development, green communications on the internet and on the internet, and our green HR planning. So we've looked at all of this. In terms of our culture, what can we do? Well, it's a source of sustained competitive advantage, emergence of new norms and roles that we will have to deal with in terms of changing the culture. So that's all important. Climate change related slogans and rituals needs to be put in place. These are all very, very, very important things that we need to have going forward. Stories about climate change impacts. So we have successes, you need to share that. Identify and appoint greenhouse gas ambassadors or climate change ambassadors and have a climate change team in the organization, multidisciplinary. That team could be led by the HR guys. Train all employees in climate change. Encourage employees to identify climate change opportunities in a day-to-day activity. So these are the typical things that you can do to influence the organizational culture. Not the only things that you can do, but surely some of the stuff that you can put in place. Then looking at again, this team could meet on a monthly basis, your climate change team, to discuss suggestions, publish achievements, as we said, incorporated in the job descriptions of the organization, and then aligning HR activities with climate change. So the green job design, all of the stuff we've spoken about. So in terms of green job design, I've included a couple of focus areas that you can also look at. And of course, what we need to do is to aspire to be a green employer of choice. So in terms of our masterclass, we don't really have time to go through all the stuff, but there's so much more in terms of how to implement this in the HR function. So whereas we focus this afternoon basically on introducing the playing field in terms of the actual implementation and what do we need to do and how do we need to do this. This we need to look at a course where we can actually go through all these things and equip you in terms of being proficient in being a core role player in climate change in your organization, and not only for your organization, but also in terms of making or ensuring that our planet is being cared for. So I'm definitely not going into all of this stuff, but it just shows you there needs to be targets, goals, all of this. HR needs to be involved in right from performance management into the financial statements. And then obviously the type of rewards that you can give, and then in terms of employee well-being, and especially when it comes to health problems from the health and safety side, this can be also looked at. So from my side, thank you for your participation, and I'm going to hand over to Sean Sharp to do our conclusion. Sean, over to you.
Afternoon, everyone. Well, firstly, I'd like to say thanks to Ronald. It's great to have someone with your passion and understanding of this topic. I think it's a topic that we're all starting to scratch the surface with, and we're definitely looking forward to doing some collaborations and some co-pods in terms of putting together like-minded people and how we can roll out your extensive plans and reports and how we can start changing one company at a time and get one company to adopt a green attitude. To all our other participants, thank you very much for joining us on our masterclass today. I think we have just established one thing, that we've just touched on ESG and the effects that it has on our lives, how this will affect our HR strategies and change business as we know it. I think we're about to see quite a big transformation. We strive to engage in a unique value proposition for our corporate education participants. At Regenesys, we have a holistic approach that goes beyond enhancing your intellectual intelligence, but also your emotional and spiritual intelligence. So while we dig deeper into these type of topics, we will challenge and thought-provoke as many people as possible. We will definitely be building additional ESG content courses and start getting a lot more participants involved. So thank you again, Ronald. Thank you, Kapil, and thanks for taking time spent with us today. I know it's load shedding in Sandton, so it's been a bit of a disaster from quite a few of our participants. But we'll definitely invite you to future ESG content webinars, and we look forward to getting you all back online. Thanks, everyone. Travel safe. If anyone would like a copy of the presentation, please just drop me an email. I'll put my contact details in a mail to you all. And let's start engaging and taking ESG to the next level. Thank you.